The fear among my colleagues and myself was that we're going to test 50 people, we're going to predict perfectly what they're going to do, maybe their friends and relatives, but how will it translate to a woman in Atlanta or a man in Ireland? Turns out humans are a lot more similar to each other than we think.
This is Velocitize Talks, and I'm Eric Jones. I'm here with Moran Cerf, who's a professor of neuroscience and business at Kellogg at Northwestern University. It's great to have you, Moran.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Now, you have a background in neuroscience, and I was sort of curious. It seems like neuroscience is having a little bit of a moment in marketing. Could you talk about why you think that is, and what the advantages are for brands who apply the sort of lessons of neuroscience very thoughtfully to their marketing efforts?
So ultimately, I think that focus groups, which was the tool of the day for many years, has failed a lot of people. You asked customers what they want to do in the future, they told you, they gave you an answer, and then you did something that aligns with it, and somehow the sales didn't go as well as they should have. And companies started to realize that asking customers questions isn't the best way to know what they want. People aren't able to tell you what they want, not because they obviously lie, but also because they lie to themselves. They tell themselves that they're gonna get skinnier and buy jeans for the skinny version of themselves. They go to the gym in theory every day. They set the alarm for 6 a.m. thinking tomorrow morning I'm gonna be the different guy who does everything on time. And somehow it doesn't happen because our brain has much more complex kind of mechanisms for decisions, and we only have access to a few of the outputs there. So neuroscience has a rising kind of interest there because we can actually look at the brain and see all the components of your thoughts and tell you, we're glad that you say that you're going to wake up at 6 a.m. You're not going to. At 6 a.m. you're going to ask yourself, who was this guy set the alarm, and you just want to be aligned with this person. So that's kind of where we replace focus groups by, instead of asking you to tell us what you think, to look at your brain while you experience a movie, a political debate, or a toy or website, and understand what you actually feel and want. That's kind of the goal.
Do you have some good examples of how you've been able to make different recommendations from focus groups?
So one field that really kind of benefited a lot from our work is the movie industry and basically any commercial on TV. The thing is, if I show you a movie, let's say for an hour and a half, and I ask you at the end to tell me about the movie, what you liked, what you didn't like, you're kind of tainted by the ending. You might have been suffering through it for an hour, but then the end was funny and you kind of remember it as better. But people in the real world will just leave in the middle. So if I ask you at the end, there's a bias there. If I say, okay, I'm going to ask you in the middle, then I kind of ruin the experience. I have to pause the movie and say, hey, tell me now what you feel. Let's continue. Tell me now what you feel. Let's continue. So they didn't find a way in the kind of film industry and in TV industry in Hollywood to get people's answers to what they enjoy without any way that stops or is biased. And then when we came and we say, just have people watch the movie, we'll look at their brain and we'll tell you when they're bored, when they're engaged, when they hate, when they love things. So this was a perfect answer to a problem that they have, and it's a many billion-dollar industry, Hollywood. And with Hollywood came the gaming industry. That was the second one. And with the gaming industry, we moved to commercials. So, Super Bowl ads cost millions of dollars, and they also want to know exactly what you're going to remember from the 30-second ad. So that's another business. And then politicians came to us and say, I'm giving a speech and I want to make sure that the people who are in the room will remember the message. So I think a lot of industries kind of follow like dominoes after Hollywood, but all of them, the common ground is that they have a person trying to deliver a message, having a big audience, and they want to know what sticks, what's going to be remembered, what's engaging, what's emotional. And the brain is the best way to get the answer, and asking you is not.
How does something like that scale? Something where, a person's tastes in movies or what they remember, or even emotional responses to things, those are very individualistic. How do you recommend that? How does this scale?
It's a great question, because one of the problems of focus groups and of our research is that you test 40, 50, 200 people and you try to infer the behavior of millions of people. Mm-hmm. The fear among my colleagues and myself was that we're going to test 50 people, we're going to predict perfectly what they're going to do, maybe their friends and relatives, but how will it translate to a woman in Atlanta or a man in Ireland? Turns out humans are a lot more similar to each other than we think. That's the answer. We learned with doing the research again and again that people are a lot more predictable. they're a lot more similar. We think that we're all snowflakes, but then at the end of the day, if you see that the brain of one person is shocked by this event, it's probably going to predict a shock among many other people. And we do studies that look at, movies, for instance, and we study only teenage girls because we think this movie is going to match them, and we predict really well what they're going to do. And then we bring boys, adults, kids. Turns out that it's much similar. So the brain is at least at the level of like what's emotional, what's memorable, what's engaging. We're a lot more similar to each other than we think we are.
How are you using neuroscience in things like the customer journey to influence, purchasing behavior more quickly, more readily for brands?
So there are many kind of ways that neuroscience can play in the customer journey. We're now looking a lot at the kind of user experience, as in you see a website, what will you look at first? What will your eyes be drawn to? What things will capture your attention? So that's one way to kind of develop an experience. But we also look at decision making. We see what are the barriers, what things make you stop. For instance, give you an example from studies we did, we tried to look at the difference between giving you the full price upfront versus charging you first the price of the ticket, let's say, and then at the end adding the convenience fee so those are two journeys, two possibilities. Turns out that we can actually look at your brain and see what happens in your brain when you get exposed to information that's negative for you, like higher price. When will it happen so that you will enjoy it more or will not notice it less? That's one version of the journey. We also can look at domains that are a lot more complex, like negotiations. So you and I talking, we can look at the brain and see what's the optimum two-brain interactions that would make the conversation better, in the sense that we're going to arrive at common grounds faster. We look at individuals and we say, okay, so this individual as a person is about to go on a journey and he's going to maybe have options to buy from. Let's look at his or her brain and see what is the perfect kind of alignment between his or her brain and the content. So for instance, what hours of the day will this brain likely to buy more things? Will this brain be influenced by emotional content or by rational content? So those things actually tell us about individuals, but they actually influence the customer journey. So you know now that this person maybe is likely to buy the People magazine at the checkout just before he leaves the supermarket if you do this and that before, and that's going to end up with this purchase because he's going to do an impulse buy, but otherwise he won't do an impulse buy. All of those things are in our brain, written, and we can figure it out.
Diving in a little bit on the emotional versus the rational, have you noticed a change generationally in terms of, older generations prefer a more rational approach versus younger generations preferring a more emotional approach?
It's a funny question. We notice a difference, but it is in one thing. Younger say they prefer one thing, and older don't say it. They all behave the same way. So older and younger, we all are irrational and we all operate in the same way. It's just that some people fight it and some people just accept it. So the younger generation are a lot more likely to argue against that. They say, no, I'm a rational thinker, and here's how my thought process work. And they kind of have answers, and at the end of the day, they buy the same things, they operate the same way. So the neuroscience kind of reveals a gap between how they perceive themselves and how they actually operate. And that is funny for us as neuroscientists, but telling for companies when they think of how their customers should approach the product and what they should emphasize. Maybe you should make them think that they arrive at a rational approach because they're going to buy more.
I'm very curious about the ways that brands are getting, consumers to engage with their websites. I saw a website recently, Klarna, where they're, essentially a finance website, but it's not at all what you would typically associate with, with finance at all. It's actually dogs and Jell-O and very, very bizarre things, but it's very engaging, very entertaining content. What are some of the cool things that you've seen that have worked very, very successfully?
So ultimately, one of the things we're learning right now that's very interesting generally across websites, different domains, is that customers, it's again, playing to the irrational thinking, tend to like when they feel that the website is doing work for them. Like, what I mean by that? There are many, many travel agency websites where you can buy airline tickets. One of the most popular ones is Kayak. What they do really beautifully is they tell you about the work they do. So you go to Kayak and you type, search for a flight ticket from Chicago to London, and then it pops up a window and says, searching United, looking at American, scanning delta. Now all websites, Expedia does that, Priceline, they all do the same thing. But Skype just shares with you the work that they do. And some people feel that, oh, they're working so hard for me right now. They're actually searching the results. They're sorting them alphabetically. They're looking at them. People really appreciate that. And they're actually, in a study that a colleague of mine did, even are willing to wait longer. So they're willing to spend 30 seconds waiting for Kayak to come back with answers because they feel, oh, it must be working so hard behind the scenes. Now, all websites do the same thing, but when you communicate the work, people, especially younger generation, really feel that the work is being done. And this is true for a lot of websites right now in a lot of fields, where if you just communicate the work, you actually get the audience to be on your side. There's tons of work that goes into banking. When you just move money from this bank to that bank, people say, come on, it's taking so long. Why is it like, but the reality is that it's a lot of things that are happening behind the scene. But if you can communicate and you're saying moving money, checking, validating, whatever, people tend to appreciate more. Now, it doesn't work with some websites, I can tell you right away. It doesn't work with Google. Google, we expect now for things to be fraction of a second. If you say, Google is now searching the results, sorting them, people get annoyed really quickly. But there's ways to solve that. But there's tools that we can help Google even.
That's interesting because one of the things that I've seen come up time and time again is actually how fast websites need to be. That after 2 seconds, if it's not fully loaded, people start to drop off precipitously.
One of the things with Google, with this colleague of mine did, was people indeed expect Google to come back with results in less, 0.2 seconds. That's the speed we expect Google. If you say to people, if you press search and Google comes back after 10 seconds, people get annoyed. However, if you rebrand the search by saying searching the deep web, then people are willing to wait 20 seconds for Google. So it's like if you tell people that you're doing more, even Google is okay. You can actually, search. And what is deep web? It's just like other websites. But somehow if you reframe it as I'm doing really hard work for you, I'm looking deep into big things and I'm going to come up with amazing results, people are willing to wait even with Google.
It's fascinating how people have these very human, very emotional responses to websites. I read some research, I don't know who they did it in concert with, but Nokia had come up with these stats that essentially the buffering with websites, the anxiety and the frustration that people feel waiting for that was akin to watching a horror film for each additional 5 seconds that you're waiting. Have you come across any similar research, or have you seen things like that in any of your studies?
So we definitely see a lot of work that show that buffering and delays are hurting the attention. I would give you the surprising result we had that came recently that actually I find interesting and I'm now looking into deeper. That is that sometimes buffering period, or we call it a less engaging period, is actually valuable for the moment afterwards. So if I give a talk right now and I speak for 30 minutes with high intensity and high engagement the entire time and keeping the audience always alert, turns out that it's going to be really difficult for people to remember what I said and to kind of focus and actually distill the message. So one of the things that good speakers do is they actually at some point intentionally let the audience fall. They kind of give you a minute to breathe in a way by not saying something important, by taking a slow breath and letting the audience do so as well. And then when they come back afterwards, the next message gets a lot more attention. So if you're building an ad for the Super Bowl, you might actually want to make a 10-second boring period at some point if the next thing is going to be so engaging that people are going to care about that. And that is something that we were surprised by. We just said, okay, let's take an ad that's 30 seconds long, engaging the entire time, just cut 10 seconds and cut the unengaging moment and move on. It turns out it affects everything. If you cut out the boring part, you affect the interesting part afterwards as well. So movies actually have to have moments where you just see the car driving without anything happening for the moment afterwards to be as engaging. So buffering, to some extent, is helpful if you control exactly when to put it and how long it should be.
It feels like technology is moving down, becoming more human. We've seen with Siri, we've seen with Alexa, we've seen with all of these voice technologies. That's a very human thing, as opposed to banging on a keyboard and sort of inputting information into your laptop or whatever the case may be. I wonder if you could talk about how these new technologies, and the importance of creating these more human experiences, could transform what websites are.
So generally, this is a trait of humans. We tend to attribute soul quickly to things that are behaving similar to us or that have randomness in them, but always have an outcome that we like. There's a study that I was involved with where they took a little robot that has a very simple way of working. It has a battery, and the battery goes from 100 to 0, and it just moves around the room randomly, but when it gets to 10%, it finds the nearest power port and it goes and plugs itself. That's all it does. Walks around, 10%, goes and plugs itself. So people observe this turtle running around, and at some point it gets 10% and it's very far from the power outlet, and it starts running towards it, and people see that it might not get there. And immediately kids start crying and adults start helping it. Everyone gets, we immediately kind of see it dying in front of us and we have to help. And that is a kind of unique character for humans. We immediately find human traits in everything. Now, it doesn't just end with robots, it also translates to companies. People attribute intentions to companies as if they're people. People say, Google wanted this and that. Amazon decided, and we kind of think about it, and it's not that it's true for any population. You don't say, vegetarians want that. You think that Google is a group, but vegetarians are not. Blondes are not a group. You don't say all blondes want that. But Google employees and Google the company and Facebook and Amazon, we think that they have kind of soul and cognition and thought. And in doing so, we actually think about them differently. And it translates a lot of times to businesses' decision, because if Facebook does something we don't like, we feel betrayed. When Toyota was having faulty brakes, people felt that Toyota betrayed them. Like they treated it like a cheating wife or husband. Like, what are they doing to me? I was a loyal customer at the time. And that is a thing that brands now have to manage, like how people treat them as a unique entity. And the kind of good and bad sides of that is that they get blamed like people. They also get sentenced in criminal justice like people. So people tend to forgive them if they say, I'm sorry. So there's like a lot of things now that we see are useful for companies to know when you think about them as a human rather than an entity.
Are there any distinctions that you would draw between, let's say B2B marketing or B2C marketing, or do you think a lot of the lessons are sort of universally applicable?
So at the end, what's universally applicable is that there's humans at the end of each of them, whether they're customers or they're two people kind of negotiating a deal. So in that sense, what we're trying to do is understand people and predict people's choices. And in that sense, there's no difference. However, the types of decisions between B2C and B2B are different in the sense that B2B is mostly about negotiation between two people, relationship, and then we really have to look at two individuals' brain and see how they interact. You and I might be it's in the end Microsoft and IBM making a big deal, but it boils down to two small populations of people that we can study and tell you, you shouldn't negotiate because the two of you aren't aligned in how you think about problems. The two of you should negotiate, but only do it in the evening because that's the optimal state of the two of you. So there's something that we can do in B2B that is a lot more specific and personal. In B2C, we don't tell you, hey, sell this product at 6 p.m. but not at 7 p.m. But we tell you, your product is seen by people like this and not like that, and think about that in this way. So people are the same, but the type of problems and the type of solutions are a little bit different.
Cambridge Analytica and Facebook and things like that, this whole sharing versus not sharing and privacy versus personalization. Where do you weigh in on that? And do brands, have to be, considerably more careful about that, especially given GDPR in Europe and, it's coming up in about, 20 days now. How do you think about that?
So I was a hacker before I was a neuroscientist, before I was an academic. So I always believed that there was a problem. I was surprised. People were surprised when the Edward Snowden thing came out. The surprise to me wasn't that it happened, was that no one thought it's going to happen. Like everyone thought it's a surprise. I thought, of course, like everyone's spying on everyone. This is like the world we live in right now. So in that sense, I'm not surprised. And on the Cambridge Analytica story, and in many ways, I feel it's the kind of villain de jour, but there's nothing different about the type of manipulations that they are doing that Goebbels didn't do in the time of like World War II. So it always was the case, and Stalin and Lenin were masters of public and manipulation. We always use the same ideas, it's just technology changes. So technology makes it easier or makes it like more targeted and more specific, but the aims and the goals were always the same. Now, where I am worried is that science, especially neuroscience and biology, are now giving access to the body and the brain in ways that up to now we had filters for. So up to now, at least, the boundaries were here. Like you could choose to turn off the TV and you wouldn't hear the message. You would choose to, read multiple sources and you would say, okay, I have more evidence. But the one thing that you never doubt is what's in your brain. Like you would never say, I have a memory that I don't think is true. Like everything that is in your brain, you trust. That's the barrier. The barrier is what's coming in. When it's in, you trust it. Like there's no chance you're gonna believe someone who tells you tomorrow this didn't happen. You remember, you're here, there's footage of that. Like you would never let anyone convince you that you weren't sitting here with me this afternoon talking. Like if they tried, you're gonna say, I don't believe it. No matter how many people come to you and tell you this didn't happen, it's in your memory. And now that you can actually get your memory and put ideas there, this becomes really scary because you would think that they're yours and you're going to build a web of associations around them and you would never know if this was something that I put there or not. And biologists are trying to find ways to get there using genetics to kind of implant choices that you didn't make by changing your mechanisms of decision. And neuroscientists are showing time and again that we can actually manipulate your thoughts into creating memories, changing your behavior when you're sleeping, when you're not there to protect yourself, and doing really things that are creepy, scary, and taking the Analytica story into a whole new level. It's no longer the old-fashioned ways, it's now straight into the source.
Artificial intelligence and machine learning, in terms of applying that kind of power to websites, maybe something that you view as a very positive development, something that you view as perhaps a hurdle, a challenge associated with those technologies.
So AI machine learning is basically taking the neuroscience work we do and translating it into computers. So we're giving them the tools. We're saying, here's how the brain works, and that is the intelligence they're trying to artificially create. Machine learning is essentially how the brain learns. We just call it neural networks in neuroscience, and they call it machine learning in computer science, but it's the same. So it's ultimately trying to take neuroscience and turning it into applicable machine code. The fears there is that not that computers are going to come to get us and all of that, even though I can tell you what is my thought on that. I think that the fear is that when we try to integrate machines in the brains, we wouldn't be able to tell apart the two, and it's going to start like being us. So I think there's a movement right now in Silicon Valley. I'm involved with it, so I shouldn't trash it too much, to basically say, let's take a chip and put it inside your brain and outsource some computation to this chip. So instead of calculating in your iPad what is 67 times 55 slowly by typing it, you would just think it. And by thinking it, you would move it to the frontal lobe where the processing is going to happen, come back to you, and it would feel to you the same way 2 + 7 feels to you naturally. You wouldn't know that you're moving it from one place to another. You just ask the question and the answer is going to pop up in your brain. That is the hallmark of artificial intelligence, but it's one step above the regular one because it ties it to the brain. And that is, I think, when it becomes interesting, scary, opportunistically, it will change everything. It's an amazing world, but also I see there's a lot of risk there.
Moran, it was really nice to talk to you. Enjoyed it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Me too.